So rookie mistake, I forgot to put everything on silent, do not disturb, and got interrupted right at the end. I did the math here. It looks like the expected cost at this point is, with that probability that your vote matters, not that your vote counts, but that it matters, is around 11 cents or 12 cents. So now we're easily getting into the realm where 0.12 is considerably less than 1,000. So at the county level, now it might actually make sense for people to vote against policies that they know are good for society and good for them. Why? Because the likelihood that their vote is decisive is sufficiently low that the expected cost is well below the expected benefit. Now this is just at the county level. Of course, we could keep going, right? We go to the close national election where this goes out to 50 million. So that's roughly a seventh of the population voting. Of course, maybe some of them aren't. And maybe we have a very close likelihood here where 0.501, now the probability is 1.1 times 10 to the negative 91st. So that now is move this decimal point 91 times in that direction, and that is the probability that your vote is decisive. In effect, right, we have a hard time even thinking about some magnitude on that, but imagine a lottery with a 1 in 100 million chance of winning. So imagine that lottery. Most of us would say that lottery is so unlikely we're not even going to invest in it. But the probability of casting a decisive vote in this situation, a moderately or very close national election, is less. The probability that vote matters is less than the probability of winning that 1 in 100 million lottery chance 11 times in a row. It's really, really, really improbable. And we can then get to some other situations here, right? Close. So we have a formula, but the key takeaway here, if I can find my eraser, isn't so much the formula. It's that once we get away from the very local level, and once we get to even moderately imbalanced policies, it turns out that it is rational for people to behave irrationally. It is rational for them to vote against their own interests. And so when we put these things together, thinking through the actual decision-making process that people engage in here, it's rational for many people to skip voting entirely. I know I do. I certainly skip voting because I look at this and I say, likelihood that my vote the likelihood that my vote matters is so low that it's not worth my time and energy. My father, on the other hand, does vote because it makes my mom happy, right? He doesn't think it makes a difference. He doesn't think his vote matters, but he votes because it makes his wife happy, which is a good thing to do. But so we put this together. Most people are going to abstain from voting, or a large portion of them. And those who vote are going to be ignorant. And those who vote and are informed are going to have a strong incentive in almost every case to vote in ways that destroy value for society. I suspect this is a slightly different take on voting than many of you have seen in any of your classes, maybe in your political science classes if you've taken them, or maybe a civics class in high school. What this means is, how effective do you think that voting it serves a check on lobbying? For me, I'd say the answer is almost not at all. Again, as long as there's some Baptist argument so that people can feel good about voting in a certain way, it's entirely logical that people would vote for things that they knew, even if they had full knowledge that a policy was socially destructive, that they would still vote for it. And again, this, at least for me, starts to help explain why a lot of low-skilled workers are in favor of the minimum wage and vote for candidates that favor minimum wage. Argue that it is rational for people to behave irrationally. what this leads us to is that, in my view, politics is effectively a lot like sports. If you ask a Redskins fan why they're a Redskins fan, or if their team is the best team, they're going, well, doesn't matter. I'm a fan, right? But I would argue that politics is the last bastion of socially acceptable magical thinking. Right? You can get away in the political sphere by saying, look, by the time it warms up this summer, the virus will just go away. It'll magically go away. It'll be a miracle. How is that going to happen? That's completely magical thinking. However, we have political people in political power who have said these things. We have people in politics who say all sorts of things. We've had candidates who say, Bernie Sanders, we should just, make everything free, right? Well, how's that going to work? It's not. But, now, so I would say it's the last bastion of socially acceptable magical thinking. So the way I think about that is, 500 or 800 years ago, believing that a witch cursed you, which is why this happened to you, or, right, that you believed in warlocks and witches, and this was acceptable. This was socially acceptable. Now, there are places around the world where people still believe these things, but most of us now would say, it's not really quite, the sort of thing that we all accept. By the same token, there are clearly some very religious people. Now, 100 years ago, people could say, look, I believe that I was given this job as an act of divine intervention, that a deity or some spirit intervened here. Now, particularly if it was a Judeo-Christian spirit, that would be more socially acceptable. Now, there's clearly people who still believe that way. My parents are some margin in that, but generally speaking, they understand that if they go out and say, I believe that God intervenes on a daily basis in everybody's lives through real-world miracles, that's not going to really be that socially acceptable. The one place where saying reality is optional doesn't just make you less socially acceptable, but actually might increase your attractiveness socially, is the political sphere. That is the one place where it is societally acceptable to say that reality is optional. And it makes sense. It makes sense why politics is the last bastion of socially acceptable magical thinking. Why? Because the cost of engaging in magical thinking in the political sphere is functionally zero. Whereas you take those same people who believe that we should give everything away for free, and they understand as soon as they start doing that with their kids or even their grandkids or the kids in their neighborhood, they know that's not going to work. The kids are going to mob them, they're going to punch each other, there's all sorts of things that are going to create problems. And so hopefully this helps make sense. So what we're going to move into next, basically, there's two lines of inquiry about the political sphere in economics. One is what we should expect from the political process. And this basically lobbying in conjunction with thinking about voting here. And again, this isn't saying that everybody won't vote, and it's not saying that everybody's going to vote in a perverse fashion, but it's saying that on balance, there's plenty of reasons to think that we would expect people to engage in that behavior. So this tells us what we should expect. This in lobbying. Again, the tendencies of the political sphere. Now, to a large extent, what these things do then is reinforce rather than work against those tendencies of government that I mentioned in the previous video. Right? So basically, you need some Baptists here because people, if you tell them that government can do this, they're going to say, ooh, yes, let's. Right? Even if they know on a private level that this is a stupid idea. Again, the short-term effects, people who say, hold off for the future. They're not going to win elections because it makes sense for people to behave in an irrational fashion. The next step is going to be to figure out, not what we should expect out of the political sphere, but to zoom in a little bit more and have an analytic framework for when it is defensible to use collective action or government. In other words, when is the benefit of using government greater than the cost of using government? Hopefully this creates some sense of pause, though, because the cost of using government in many cases is going to be much bigger than what we might expect it to be. So this in conjunction with the lobbying discussion tells us gives us a framework. It's not a not one size fits all solution. It's not one answer fits everything. It's a set of tools to start to think about whether politicians have the information and the incentives to act on that information to implement quality policy. And I think by and large, the puzzle isn't why government doesn't work better. The puzzle for me as a political economist is why the heck politics works as well as it does. Because given these things, I would expect it to be even more perverse than it currently is. So next up, I will come back and start building a framework for what we should use government for.